So today we're going to tie a jig pattern that's specifically for lake trout. Stay tuned. So this is a jig that I use in the Finger Lakes here in central New York State. Usually around mid to late November into December, that time period where it's a little bit too cold to fly fish, and we definitely don't have safe ice yet for ice fishing. So we go to the Finger Lakes. We're fishing for lake trout from shore, and this is a pattern that I was asked to kind of come up with. A guy I've fished with for years had noticed some of the locals who were being pretty successful, and they were using it was a green and black, really I thought it was kind of an ugly looking jig. It was just a forest green hair with black. The head color didn't much matter. We saw a mix of blacks and browns and green heads. They all had green collar, and a lot of them had like a red tinsel. So we figured out the main thing were goby, which, you know, throughout New York State, almost every lake now has gobies. Walleye are feeding on them, bass are feeding on them, and so are the lake trout. So what I ended up doing is I sat down, tried to hash out some of the colors that I thought would be a better representation, and we came up with a pattern, fished with it, and we were pretty successful. I was actually pretty pleased. Actually had a couple of the locals, you know, kind of watching us and saying, "Hey, what are you using?" So that was a good indicator. And it wasn't a one-time thing. We've been using this pattern since about 2007, somewhere around there. I'd have to check my book. Usually I write down when we come up with something new, just so I can remember as I retie. So let's switch over just so I can show you real quick. So the original was just a very plain, it's a ball head jig with an olive head with the black bucktail back and the olive bucktail belly. We used red thread, and on this one, a little bit of red crystal flash right in the center. So there's 4 or 5 strands of crystal flash. Expanding on that, the same 1/4 ounce olive head. The eye on this one just happens to have a pupil. I don't think it matters much one way or the other. I actually like using the fluorescent eye without the pupil. But again, the red collar, and this jig was cast with I believe it was a Eagle Claw, the 570 hook that was red. So a red hook. And the 570 is very similar, almost a perfect match to the Mustad 32755. And again, this is a 1/0 size hook. And on this jig we have the pearl crystal flash, and I kept it again right down this, you know, right down the center in the body of the hair. Then we went to just changing the pattern up a little bit. This goes back to the gold hook, the 32755. It's a 1/0 hook from Mustad. I must have been running out of olive heads because we did this on black. With just the pearl crystal flash, and again putting the crystal flash in between the bucktail. And then finally, what we settled on, So the olive head, this again has the eagle claw hook, which is red. And then the only difference is I put the pearl crystal flash down each side. And this is the pattern we're going to tie today. So I don't have any cast up with the red hooks. I don't necessarily think the red hook made a huge difference because we do have the red collar on there. And the heads that we have today will be the olive head with that fluorescent eye with no pupil. Another head style that I think would work very well, and this is that teardrop style or pear-shaped head that I tied some of those old, early 70s style pike jigs on. This hook is a 32755 number 2, so it's fairly short compared to the length of the 1/0 hook. This mold would actually take both of those hooks with just a slight modification where the point of the hook touches the mold. So I might cast up a few of these heads with that longer 1/0 hook. I think it really would make a difference just because of the profile. So again, with this jig, you have that teardrop profile, which I think might add to the profile looking more goby-ish. So, but just a regular ball-headed jig has really been the staple in our go-to. And what we'll do today is we're going to do the pattern that evolved to the pattern that we finally settled on. So we will start with our size A. This is Pack Bay rod wrapping thread, size A. This is just a plain nylon, round nylon, unwaxed. I walk the thread down about halfway towards the hook point with open wraps and then back up to the head. We'll start with our darkest color first, so the black bucktail. This pinch I'm taking is a little bit thick because there's a lot of short hairs, and I know that we're going to pull a lot of that bulk out in this step here. So see, as you can see, there's a lot of under hair, just short stuff that will come out. We'll switch our grip and just restack some of these longer pieces by hand. And any of the hairs that are a little crooked or they stick out funny or maybe the tip is broken, you can just pull those out of your pinch until you're happy with it. Now the tail on this will be the length of the body past the bend of the hook, and on this vise it's at the end of this silver of my jaws, so right before the black body of my vise. Another broken tip. Once we're happy with that, switch our grip one last time and keep this pinch tight through the entire process. Lock this on with 3 wraps towards the bend of the hook, 2 or 3 wraps towards the head, and we give that a twist. We'll go with our olive, which becomes the belly of the jig as we fish it. And this is just a medium olive. You could go with a darker brownish or a darker green olive, or you could use a lighter or more yellow olive, whichever you prefer. I kind of like to have a combination in my bag, just one or two that are just slightly different. You never know what the fish are going to key in on. As I mentioned, we're fishing these in the Finger Lakes for the lake trout. We're fishing from shore, and it's usually early to mid-December, you know, before ice season really starts. You just want to get outside every once in a while. There we go. So once we're happy with our length, switch our grip one last time, keep this pinch tight, and we'll lock this into place. Again, there's 3 wraps towards the bend of the hook, and then I can walk with touching wraps up to the head of the jig. I can walk the thread back. I'm just going to check this quickly. So I haven't quite finished this collar. I was checking the overall shape, trying to keep it uniform. And what we'll do before we finish the collar is I have, this is Flashabou Accent, their pearl. Crystal Flash, their pearl, also very good. I don't remember the product number. You know, Crystal Flash has, all of these have a few different types of pearl, that, you know, some that are bluish and pinkish. And let's see, what do we have here? I have also on my table Crystal Flash. This is also called Crystal Hair. This is the same color as Crystal Hair number 19, and it's a pearl, but it has a pinkish hue to it. But the pearl that I'm using, this is more of a white pearl. As the light hits it, you see a little bit of green, you see a little bit of yellow. But I've unlocked the jaws on my vise so I can rotate, so I can look at this side of the jig. And I'm just going to take, I typically put 4 strands down each side. I just trim the ends to make sure they're nice and straight, and I just lay this right down the lateral line. Couple wraps towards the bend of the hook and a couple wraps just to the other side to lock that on. At this point I will just trim it so it's equal to or just slightly less in length of the tail. I don't like to extend it. Some people do. They make it about at least the length of the head and collar past the hair. That's fine. I like it to be all uniform. I can rotate to the other side, and again I'll take 4 strands. Many tyers will cut a longer strand, you know, have the Crystal Flash, you know, 2.5 times longer. Just put it under your last wrap, and then you can tie it on with 4 strands on each side. I try to be a little bit stingy with the Crystal Flash and not waste too much. So in this way I'm only taking off exactly what I need, and what I'm trimming is not as much as I would if I was just taking longer pieces, or even a full, you know, 4 full strands, you know, and using them all at once. So now what we can do, take our thread and I wrap it all the way down to the edge of the collar towards the bend of the hook, and then I can walk it back up to the head. To finish this off, I'll use a length of size A thread of an opposite color. You can use a whip finish tool for this or whip finish by hand. I just do it this manner to help maintain a nice cone shape to the collar and just be a little bit more neat. So I can walk the thread with touching wraps to about the center of the collar, and then I can walk them back to the head. If you want to add, here's a couple wraps, again about a quarter of the way towards the bend of the hook, and then back up to the head. When finishing this way, you want to maintain tension between your hand and the jig at all times, even when I'm switching hands. So there's always tension. That collar will not come loose. Pull this through and trim the collar. And there we have it. Finger Lakes goby pattern. Other combinations of this that work well, natural brown with the olive, dyed brown with the olive, and switching it up just a little bit, tying it with the olive on the back with a lighter color for the belly. So olive and white, olive and yellow, olive and chartreuse, like a dull chartreuse, not a super bright chartreuse, but olive and a nice dull chartreuse. All work well. And the main thing with all of those is just adding that little bit of pearl flash, and the red collar really seems to make a difference. So finishing this off, we'll do this real quick. I use my lacquer-based head cement, and it's thin just slightly. It will saturate the threads. A little bit that gets onto the hair, capillary action, will soak in and then be drawn back underneath the collar. And there we have it, a Finger Lakes goby pattern. A jig that's perfect for all sorts of fish, but really works well with the lake trout. So if you enjoyed what we did here today, go ahead, hit that like button. Add some comments down below if there's something you'd like to see me tie. I read all the comments, try to respond to them, but if there's something that you'd like to see tied, I'll do my best and do that as well. As always, like and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. And until next time, tight lines.